They found her standing in the rain at 3 a.m., barefoot on the edge of the bridge, her white hospital gown clinging to her skeletal frame. But that's not what made the police officers freeze. It was her eyes, completely hollow, as if someone had reached inside and stolen every spark of humanity. When they asked her name, she smiled. Not a normal smile, the kind that makes your blood run cold. "I don't have a name anymore," she whispered. "They took it from me along with everything else." What happened to Sarah Mitchell in the basement of St. Augustine's Psychiatric Hospital would shatter everything you think you know about trust, healing, and the monsters who hide behind the word doctor. This is the story Netflix buried. This is the story that made 3 executives resign. This is the truth they never wanted you to hear. And once you know what they did to her, you'll never sleep the same way again. The Descent. Sarah Mitchell had always been the kind of person who saved others. At 28, she was a pediatric nurse with a smile that could calm the most terrified child, hands that moved with practiced gentleness through 4S and bandages, and a heart that genuinely believed in the goodness of people. Her colleagues at Boston Children's Hospital called her Saint Sarah, though she'd laugh it off every time, her cheeks flushing pink. She didn't think of herself as special. She was just doing what felt right. But everyone has a breaking point, and Sarah found hers on a rainy October evening in 2019. She'd been working the night shift when little Emma Rodriguez came in, 7 years old, caught in a house fire, third-degree burns covering 40% of her tiny body. Sarah held the girl's hand through 6 hours of surgery, whispering stories about princesses and dragons, promising that everything would be okay. Emma believed her, Emma trusted her, and Emma died at 4:47 a.m. while Sarah was still holding her hand. Sarah felt something crack inside her chest that morning. Not break, crack. Like the first fracture in a frozen lake, spreading slowly, inevitably, until the entire surface would shatter. She kept working. That's what good nurses do. They compartmentalize, they keep going, but the cracks kept spreading. She started having panic attacks in the supply closet. She couldn't sleep without seeing Emma's face. Food tasted like ash. The world started feeling like it was wrapped in gauze, distant and muffled and wrong. Her boyfriend Marcus noticed first. "You're not okay, Sarah," he said one night, finding her sitting in the dark living room at 2 a.m., staring at nothing. "You need to talk to someone." "I'm fine," she lied. The words felt heavy in her mouth, like stones. But she wasn't fine, and 3 weeks later, during a routine shift, she froze completely while trying to insert N4 into a 6-year-old boy's arm. Just froze. Her hands shook so violently that the needle clattered to the floor. The head nurse, Dr. Patricia Chen, found her sitting on the floor of the bathroom, sobbing into her hands. "Sarah," Dr. Chen said gently, kneeling beside her. "Honey, you can't keep doing this to yourself. You're experiencing severe trauma. You need professional help." Sarah knew she was right. She'd spent years telling patients' families about the importance of mental health, about how trauma was a wound that needed treatment just like any physical injury. She believed in therapy. She believed in healing. She just never imagined where that belief would lead her. Dr. Chen recommended a colleague, Dr. James Rothschild, a psychiatrist who ran a private treatment facility called St. Augustine's Behavioral Health Center. "He's brilliant," Dr. Chen assured her. "He specializes in PTSD in medical professionals. I've referred 3 nurses to him in the past year, and they all came back transformed." Transformed. That word should have been Sarah's first warning. The facility sat 30 miles outside Boston, a sprawling Victorian mansion converted into a treatment center, surrounded by woods that seemed to press in from all sides. The brochure showed serene images of therapy rooms with soft lighting, gardens for meditation, communal spaces designed for healing. It looked peaceful, safe. Sarah's first meeting with Dr. Rothschild seemed to confirm her hopes. He was in his mid-50s, with silver hair and warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. His office smelled like leather and old books. He listened, really listened, as Sarah poured out the story of Emma, of the panic attacks, of feeling like she was drowning in her own mind. "You're not broken, Sarah," Dr. Rothschild said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made you believe every word. "You're wounded, and wounds can heal, but you need intensive treatment. The trauma has embedded itself deeply in your nervous system. Outpatient Therapy won't be enough. You mean I should check in here? Sarah asked, anxiety flickering in her stomach. Just for 30 days, Dr. Rothschild assured her. 30 days to reset your system, to process the trauma properly, to give yourself the space to heal without the demands of the outside world. I've seen cases like yours before, Sarah. With the right treatment, you can not only recover, you can become stronger than you ever were. Marcus wasn't sure about it. 30 days is a long time, he said that night, holding her hand across the dinner table. And it's so isolated out there. Can't you do therapy here in the city? But Sarah was desperate. The cracks had spread so far now that she felt like she might shatter completely at any moment. She needed help, real help, and Dr. Rothschild seemed to offer exactly what she needed. She checked herself into St. Augustine's on a gray November morning, carrying a small suitcase and a heart full of hope that she didn't quite deserve to feel anymore. The first week was everything they'd promised. Group therapy sessions where she met other healthcare workers struggling with similar trauma, art therapy in a sun-filled studio, meditation in the garden, even as autumn stripped the trees bare. Individual sessions with Dr. Rothschild, where she finally felt like someone understood the specific horror of holding a dying child's hand. She met other patients. Jennifer, a paramedic who'd watched her partner die in an ambulance crash. David, an ER doctor who couldn't stop seeing the faces of the patients he'd lost. They became friends, bonding over shared nightmares and the fragile hope of healing. I actually feel better, Sa. Ra told Marcus during their supervised phone call at the end of week 1. I think I made the right choice. But during week 2, things began to shift in ways so subtle that Sarah almost didn't notice. The medication changed first. Dr. Rothschild explained that her anxiety required a more aggressive approach. The pills made her foggy, made time feel elastic and strange. When she mentioned feeling disconnected, he increased the dosage. It's part of the process, he assured her with that warm smile. We need to quiet the noise in your mind so we can do the real work. The therapy sessions started lasting longer. 3 hours, 4 hours. She'd emerge feeling hollowed out, unable to quite remember everything they'd discussed. Dr. Rothschild called it deep processing. Sarah called it exhausting. Then came the isolation sessions. Some trauma is too deep to process in a group setting, Dr. Rothschild explained. We need to access the buried memories, the ones your conscious mind has locked away. It requires privacy, intensity. The isolation room was in the basement. Sarah's stomach twisted as she followed an orderly down the stairs on her 14th day at St. Augustine's. The basement was nothing like the rest of the facility. No soft lighting, no comfortable furniture, just concrete walls, fluorescent lights, and rooms with heavy doors. This is where the real healing happens, Dr. Rothschild said as he led her into a small room with a chair bolted to the floor. I need you to trust me, Sarah. Can you do that? She wanted to say no. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she'd spent 2 weeks being told that her instincts were broken, that her mind couldn't. She trusted that only through complete surrender to the treatment could she heal. I trust you, she whispered. That was her second mistake. The first was coming here at all. The therapy started with what Dr. Rothschild called memory reconstruction. He asked about Emma, about the fire, about watching the little girl die. But he didn't just ask. He pushed, pressed, demanded details with an intensity that felt like violation. How did her skin smell when it was burning? He asked, leaning close. What sound did she make when she took her last breath? Did you feel relief when she finally died? No, Sarah cried out. I didn't. I would never. Don't lie to yourself, Dr. Rothschild interrupted. That's what's keeping you sick, the guilt, the secret part of you that felt relieved when she stopped suffering. When you stopped having to watch. That's not true, Sarah sobbed, but doubt crept in like poison. Had she felt relief? Was there something wrong with her, something dark that she'd been hiding even from herself? The sessions grew longer, more intense. Dr. Rothschild introduced cognitive recalibration, a technique that involved sleep deprivation, sensory manipulation, and what he called therapeutic breaking. Sarah would be kept in the isolation room for hours, sometimes days, with minimal food and water, subjected to recordings of crying children. Flashing lights, sudden loud noises. "We're breaking down the false narratives your mind has constructed," he explained. "It's painful but necessary. Like setting a broken bone, it has to hurt before it can heal." Sarah tried to tell herself this was normal, that intensive trauma therapy was supposed to be difficult. But when she saw Jennifer in the hallway during week 3, she almost didn't recognize her. The paramedic had lost at least 15 pounds. Her eyes were sunken and glassy, and she walked with the shuffling gait of someone heavily sedated. "Jennifer?" Sarah whispered, grabbing her friend's arm. "Are you okay?" Jennifer stared at her with those hollow eyes. "Dr. Rothschild is helping me," she said in a flat, rehearsed voice. "He's helping all of us. We're getting better. We're becoming new." Becoming new. The phrase made Sarah's skin crawl. That night, she tried to call Marcus during the designated phone time, but the orderly informed her that her phone privileges had been suspended. "Dr. Rothschild's orders," the orderly said. "You're at a critical stage in treatment. Outside contact would be counterproductive. But that's not. I have a right to. Do you want to get better, Sarah?" The orderly's voice was gentle, but his eyes were hard. "Or do you want to stay broken?" Sarah retreated to her room, her heart pounding. Something was very wrong here. This wasn't therapy. This was... She didn't know what it was, but every cell in her body screamed danger. She started watching more carefully. The other patients moved like zombies, their personalities erased, replaced with a strange compliance. New patients arrived hopeful and left 3 weeks later as hollow shells, and no one ever seemed to actually leave. She'd been told that patients went home after 30 days, but she never saw anyone depart. During her next isolation session, Sarah decided to resist. When Dr. Rothschild asked his invasive questions, she refused to answer. When he tried to make her top key additional medication, she clenched her jaw shut. Dr. Rothschild's warm smile never wavered. "I see," he said softly. "You're experiencing resistance. That's a common phase, but we have methods for working through resistance." He nodded to 2 orderlies who'd been standing by the door. They moved towards Sarah with mechanical precision. "What do you know? Don't touch me." They strapped her into the chair. Dr. Rothschild produced a syringe filled with something clear and viscous. "This will help you surrender," he said, still smiling that horrible smile. "Surrender is the first step to transformation." The drug sent Sarah into a nightmare world where reality dissolved. She couldn't tell if hours or days passed. She saw Emma's burning face in the ceiling tiles. She heard her own voice confessing to terrible things she'd never done. She felt her sense of self slipping away like water through her fingers. When she finally emerged from the fog, she'd lost 4 days. 4 days gone. Just gone. She looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself. Her hair was matted, her cheeks hollow, her eyes carrying that same terrible emptiness she'd seen in Jennifer's face. That's when Sarah realized the horrifying truth. Dr. Rothschild wasn't trying to heal trauma. He was trying to erase identity, to break down his patients completely and rebuild them into something else, something compliant, something empty, something that would never question or resist. This wasn't a hospital. It was a laboratory for destroying human beings, and she was running out of time before there was nothing left of Sarah Mitchell to save. The resurrection. Sarah Mitchell had always believed the human spirit was resilient, that people could survive almost anything if they held on to hope. But as she sat in her small room on her 23rd day at St. Augustine's, she discovered something that terrified her. Hope could be extracted from a person like a tooth being pulled, leaving nothing but a bleeding socket and the memory of what used to be there. She couldn't remember what Marcus looked like anymore. The medications had turned her memory into Swiss cheese. She'd forgotten her mother's phone number, the name of her childhood dog, the color of her favorite sweater. Dr. Rothschild called it therapeutic amnesia, clearing out the cluttered attic of trauma to make room for new, healthier thoughts. Sarah called it erasure. She was being deleted, line by line, like a document someone was editing out of existence. But there was still a spark left, small, but burning. And that spark ignited into flame the day she met Rebecca. Rebecca Chen was Dr. Patricia Chen's daughter, though Sarah didn't know that at first. Rebecca worked as a volunteer coordinator at St. Augustine's, arranging the art therapy sessions and meditation classes. Unlike the orderlies and nurses who moved through the halls with dead eyes and mechanical efficiency, Rebecca seemed genuinely alive. Her movements were natural, her smile was real, and her eyes held something that had become rare in this place: compassion. She found Sarah in the art therapy room, sitting in front of a blank canvas, brush in hand, unable to make herself create anything. "Can't find the inspiration?" Rebecca asked gently, pulling up a chair beside her. Sarah turned to look at her, and something in Rebecca's face made tears spring to her eyes. The first real tears she'd cried in over a week. Everything else had been the empty sobbing they induced during isolation sessions, tears with no emotion behind them. "I can't remember why I'm here," Sarah whispered. "I can't remember who I was before. It's like someone reached inside my head and just scooped me out." Rebecca's expression shifted to something Sarah couldn't quite read. Concern? Recognition? Fear? "How long have you been here?" Rebecca asked quietly. 23 days, I think. Time feels strange." "Your name is Sarah Mitchell," Rebecca said, her voice urgent and low. "You're a pediatric nurse from Boston. You came here because you witnessed a patient's death and developed PTSD. You have a boyfriend named Marcus who calls the facility every single day asking about you. Your favorite color is blue. You have a small scar on your left knee from when you fell off a bike as a kid. You're allergic to shellfish. You wanted to be a writer before you became a nurse." Sarah stared at her in shock. "How do you know all that?" "Because I've been watching you, and I've been watching what they do here." Rebecca glanced toward the door, then leaned in closer. "Sarah, you need to listen to me very carefully. This isn't a treatment facility. Dr. Rothschild is conducting unauthorized experiments in psychotropic manipulation and identity reformation. He's been doing it for 3 years, and my mother, Dr. Patricia Chen, she's been sending him patients without knowing what he really does here." The words should have shocked Sarah, but instead they felt like confirmation of something she'd known in her bones, but been too drugged to articulate. "He's breaking us," Sarah said. "Breaking us down into nothing, and rebuilding you into compliant, psychologically dependent patients who will never speak out about what happened, because you won't remember enough to articulate it." Rebecca finished. "I started investigating 6 months ago when a patient my mother referred, a firefighter named Michael Santos, came back to her office for a follow-up. He seemed wrong, hollow. My mother thought the treatment had worked, but I recognized the signs of psychological conditioning. I've been documenting everything since then." "Why haven't you gone to the police?" Rebecca's face darkened. "I tried. Dr. Rothschild has connections, former patients in positions of power who've been programmed to protect him, officials who've been paid off, lawyers who make evidence disappear. The one journalist who tried to investigate had a sudden mental breakdown and was discredited. The system is rigged, Sarah. He's untouchable." "Then what can we do?" Sarah felt hope and despair warring in her chest. "We get you out of here tonight before your 30 days are up. Once you reach day 30, they do a final integration session that basically completes the personality erasure. After that, you're gone. The real you is gone forever." Sarah's hands were shaking. "There are others, Jennifer, David, so many others." "I know," Rebecca said, pain flickering across her face. "But we can't save everyone. Not yet. First we save you, then we use your testimony to bring this place down. But you have to be strong enough to remember, Sarah. You have to hold on to who you are for 7 more hours." 7 hours had never seemed so long. Rebecca gave her a small white pill. "This is a counteragent to the drugs they've been giving you. It won't reverse the damage, but it'll clear your head enough to function. Take it 3 hours from now, right after dinner. At 2 a.m. I'll create a distraction. A fire in the West Wing, just smoke, nothing dangerous. When you hear the alarm, go to the kitchen entrance in the East Wing. I'll have a car waiting." "What about you?" Sarah asked. "Won't they know you helped me?" Rebecca smiled sadly. "I've been preparing for this. I have documentation of everything hidden with 3 different journalists who've agreed to publish simultaneously if anything happens to me. And I'm my mother's daughter. Dr. Chen has connections too. I'll be okay. But you need to survive, Sarah. You need to remember. Because right now, you're the only chance those other patients have." The next 7 hours were the longest of Sarah's life. She went through the motions of the evening routine: dinner in the communal room, mandatory group session, medication time. But instead of swallowing the pills, she tucked them under her tongue and spit them out in the bathroom. She took Rebecca's counteragent and felt a veil lifting from her mind, memories swimming back into focus. Marcus. She could see his face now, the crooked smile, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the small birthmark on his right shoulder. Her mother's phone number came back, 617-555-0147. Her childhood dog was named Biscuit. Her favorite sweater was teal blue. She was Sarah Mitchell, and she was going to survive. At 1:47 a.m., Sarah lay in her bed, fully dressed under the covers, her heart hammering so hard she was sure the whole building could hear it. She'd packed nothing, Rebecca said bringing anything would draw attention. She was leaving with only herself, and she had to pray that was enough. At 2:03 a.m., the fire alarm screamed to life. Sarah moved on pure instinct, slipping out of her room while orderlies rushed toward the west wing. The hallways were chaos. Smoke seeping from under doors, patients emerging confused and disoriented, staff shouting orders. She made it to the kitchen entrance, her legs shaking so badly she could barely walk. The door was unlocked, just as Rebecca had promised. And then Dr. Rothschild appeared at the end of the hallway. "Sarah," he said calmly, walking toward her through the smoke and chaos as if he had all the time in the world. "Where are you going?" "Run," her instinct screamed, but her body had frozen. "You're at such a critical stage," Dr. Rothschild continued, still smiling that warm, terrible smile. 7 more days and you would have been healed, truly healed. Why would you throw that away? "You're not healing anyone," Sarah said, her voice stronger than she felt. "You're destroying them." "I'm liberating them from the prison of trauma," Dr. Rothschild corrected. "I'm giving them a fresh start, a clean slate. Do you know how many of my patients go on to live peaceful, productive lives? How many return to thank me? How many remember enough of themselves to know they should be angry?" Sarah countered. For the first time, Dr. Rothschild's smile faltered. "You've been speaking with Rebecca Chen. That's unfortunate for both of you." He reached for her, and Sarah made a choice. She'd spent 23 days being passive, being compliant, letting them do thin. GS to her. No more. She grabbed a heavy pot from the kitchen counter and swung it with every ounce of strength she had left. It connected with Dr. Rothschild's temple with a sickening crack. He went down hard, blood pooling beneath his silver hair. Sarah didn't wait to see if he'd get back up. She ran. Rebecca was waiting in a black Honda, engine running. Sarah threw herself into the passenger seat, and they peeled out of the parking lot as sirens wailed in the distance. They didn't speak for the first 20 minutes. Sarah just shook, adrenaline and terror and relief coursing through her system in waves. "Did you kill him?" Rebecca finally asked. "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "I don't care." They drove to a safe house that Rebecca had prepared, a small apartment in Portland, rented under a false name. Over the next 3 days, Sarah wrote down everything she could remember, every detail of the isolation sessions, the medications, the psychological manipulation. Rebecca had recordings, documents, testimony from other victims she'd secretly contacted. They sent it all to the journalists simultaneously, the Boston Globe, the New York Times, and an investigative podcast that had been looking into psychiatric abuse. The story broke like a bomb. St. Augustine's was raided by federal agents. 73 patients were removed and taken to legitimate facilities for deprogramming and care. Dr. James Rothschild was arrested on 127 counts of assault, unlawful imprisonment, practicing medicine without proper licenses, and human experimentation. But the victory felt hollow when Sarah learned the full scope of what he'd done. Jennifer, her friend, the paramedic, she'd been so thoroughly broken that she no longer remembered her own daughter's name. David, the ER doctor, had been discharged 2 weeks before the raid and walked into traffic 3 days later, his sense of self-preservation erased along with everything else. 19 former patients had committed suicide in the past 2 years. Dozens more lived in a fog of dissociation and fragmented memory, unable to hold jobs or maintain relationships. The psychological damage was so extensive that even with intensive therapy, many would never fully recover. And Dr. Rothschild, his lawyers argued that he genuinely believed he was helping people, that his methods were experimental but well-intentioned. The case dragged on for 18 months. Sarah testified at the trial. So did Rebecca. So did 12 other survivors who could still remember enough to speak. The prosecution presented evidence that Dr. Rothschild had been intentionally creating psychologically dependent patients as part of a long-term experiment in consciousness reformation. They showed financial records proving he'd been selling his techniques to private military contractors and authoritarian governments. They demonstrated that he'd known exactly what he was doing, not healing, but destroying and rebuilding human beings for profit and power. Dr. James Rothschild was sentenced to 45 years in federal prison. He showed no remorse. At his sentencing, he smiled that warm smile and said, "History will vindicate my work. I was helping them transcend their limitations." Sarah watched him being led away in handcuffs, and she felt nothing. He'd taken so much from her: memories, time, the ability to trust therapy or Tayan, or the mental health system. He'd stolen pieces of her identity that she'd never get back, but he hadn't taken everything. The recovery was brutal. Sarah spent 6 months in intensive therapy with Dr. Eleanor Morrison, a trauma specialist who helped her untangle what had been done to her mind. She experienced flashbacks, nightmares, dissociative episodes. There were days she couldn't remember her own name, days she woke up not knowing where or who she was. Marcus stayed with her through all of it. "You're still Sarah," he'd remind her gently when she panicked. "You're still the woman who became a nurse because you wanted to help people. You're still the person who held Emma's hand because she deserved not to die alone. They tried to take that from you, but they failed. You're still here." Slowly, painfully, Sarah rebuilt herself. Not into who she'd been before, that person was gone and mourning her was part of the process, but into someone new, someone stronger, someone who understood that monsters don't always look like monsters, that harm can be inflicted with a smile and warm words, that institutional authority is no guarantee of safety. She never went back to nursing. The hospital environments triggered too many memories. Instead, she found a new calling: advocacy for psychiatric patient rights. She started a nonprofit called Speak While You Can that helped survivors of psychiatric abuse navigate the legal system and find legitimate treatment. Rebecca became the organization's legal director. Together, they helped shut down 3 other facilities that were found to be using similar techniques. They pushed for legislation requiring independent oversight of psychiatric hospitals. They created resources for families to identify warning signs of abuse. 2 years after escaping St. Augustine's, Sarah stood in front of a Senate committee investigating psychiatric patient abuse. She was nervous. Public speaking still terrified her, and the fluorescent lights of the hearing room made her think of the basement isolation room. But she spoke. She told her story. She named what had been done to her. "Dr. Rothschild told me that surrender was the first step to transformation," Sarah said to the assembled senators. "He was right, but not in the way he meant. I did have to surrender. I had to surrender the belief that authority figures always have my best interests at heart. I had to surrender the idea that institutions with nice buildings and professional credentials are automatically trustworthy. I had to surrender the version of myself that thought being polite and compliant would keep me safe. The transformation wasn't what he tried to force on me. It was what I chose for myself. I transformed from a victim into a survivor, from someone who was silent into someone who speaks, from someone who was broken into someone who is healing every single day by choice. The other patients at St. Augustine's deserve that same choice. They deserve treatment that honors their humanity instead of erasing it. They deserve to heal, not to be healed at. And they deserve a system that protects them instead of delivering them to predators in white coats." The Psychiatric Patient Protection Act passed 7 months later. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Sarah still has nightmares. She still has days when her memory falters, when she can't grasp who she is. She still carries the scars of what was done to her in that basement. But she also has something Dr. Rothschild tried to take from her: agency, the power to choose her own path, the strength to help others find theirs. 3 years after escaping St. Augustine's, Sarah received a letter from Jennifer, the paramedic who'd been so thoroughly broken. With intensive therapy and deprogramming, Jennifer had recovered enough to remember her daughter, though many memories were still gone forever. "I know I'll never be who I was before," Jennifer wrote, "but I'm learning to be okay with who I am now. Thank you for speaking up. Thank you for fighting. Thank you for remembering when the rest of us couldn't." Sarah folded the letter carefully and added it to the box where she kept all the letters from survivors. There were 47 now, each one a reminder of why she kept going on the hard days. She thought about Emma sometimes, the little girl whose death had set all of this in motion. Sarah had been trying to heal from the trauma of losing Emma when she walked into Dr. Rothschild's trap. The irony wasn't lost on her. But she'd learned something important. Trauma doesn't heal in a straight line. It doesn't heal on anyone else's timeline. And it certainly doesn't heal through having your identity erased. True healing happens when you integrate the pain into who you are, when you let it change you without letting it destroy you, when you find meaning in the suffering without pretending it didn't hurt like hell. Sarah would carry Emma with her forever, not as an open wound, but as a scar, a reminder of what she'd lost, but also of what she'd survived, of who she'd become because of it. She was Sarah Mitchell, survivor, advocate, fighter, and no one, not Dr. Rothschild, not the system that enabled him, not the nightmares that still haunted her, could take that away. The message. This story is based on real patterns of psychiatric abuse that have occurred in institutions around the world. While Dr. Rothschild and St. Augustine's are fictional, the techniques described, psychological manipulation, identity erasure, experimental treatments conducted without consent, have documented precedents. The reason stories like this are too dark for mainstream platforms isn't because they're graphic or violent. It's because they force us to confront an uncomfortable truth. The people and institutions we're taught to trust with our most vulnerable selves can become instruments of profound harm. Mental health treatment saves lives. Good psychiatrists, therapists, and facilities do exist and do incredible work. But we must also acknowledge that the power dynamic inherent in psychiatric care creates opportunities for abuse. Patients in crisis are vulnerable. They're desperate for help. And that desperation can be exploited by those who prioritize control over care, compliance over healing, their own theories over their patient's humanity. Sarah's story is a reminder that we must always maintain our right to question, to resist, to advocate for ourselves, even when we're being told that our own minds can't be trusted. It's a reminder that healing happens through empowerment, not erasure, through integration, not obliteration, through honoring the whole person, scars and all, not trying to sand them down into something more convenient. If you or someone you love is seeking mental health treatment, ask questions, demand transparency, insist on maintaining contact with the outside world, trust your instincts, and remember, you are never so broken that you deserve to be erased. Your story matters, your voice matters, your survival matters. Speak while you can.